The applause should have been the loudest sound in the room. Instead, all I could hear was the scraping of two empty chairs. "They're probably just running late," one of my old coworkers whispered as he glanced toward the entrance for what must have been the 10th time. I forced a smile. "Traffic," I lied. "You know how it is." The truth arrived a few seconds later. My phone buzzed. "Eric." I smiled for the first time all evening, convinced he was calling to say he was outside. Instead, I read the message. "Dad, huge emergency at work. Can't make it. We'll celebrate another time." Before I could even lower the phone, it buzzed again. "Melissa. I'm so sorry. Tyler's schedule got crazy today and we just can't make it. Love you." I stared at both messages while the room around me kept clapping. 43 years climbing poles in freezing winters, crawling through flooded utility vaults, inspecting dangerous electrical failures before most people were awake. And somehow my own retirement celebration ranked below a work meeting and a child's afternoon activity. Across the room sat two place cards. ERIC. Melissa. Untouched. Unclaimed. Painfully visible. Then my supervisor leaned toward the microphone. "Harold, we'd love for you to come up and say a few words." I slipped the phone into my pocket, stood, straightened my jacket, and walked to the podium as if nothing had happened. Neither of my children knew it yet. But within 48 hours, they would suddenly remember they had a father. 43 years earlier, I'd walked into the municipal electrical inspection department carrying a lunchbox, a borrowed pair of work boots, and exactly $28 in my checking account. Now at 66, I was walking away with a plaque, a handshake, and enough memories to fill a lifetime. The community banquet hall wasn't fancy, but it was full. Former supervisors, neighbors, retired inspectors, electricians I'd worked beside for decades. Even the young apprentices I'd mentored over the last few years had shown up. One after another, they shared stories that made everyone laugh. Someone remembered the blizzard, where I'd stayed on duty for 20 straight hours restoring emergency power. Someone else joked that I could identify faulty wiring just by listening to a breaker panel hum. Every story ended the same way. Because that's just who Harold is. Dependable. Patient. Always there. Every compliment felt genuine. Yet my eyes kept drifting toward those two empty chairs near the front of the room. Each time the entrance door opened, my heart betrayed me. Maybe Eric finally made it. Maybe Melissa surprised me. Maybe. No. Just another guest heading toward the buffet. One of my closest friends, Frank, quietly slid into the seat beside me. "You okay?" "I'm fine." He looked toward the empty chairs. "You don't have to pretend with me." I looked down at the retirement plaque resting beside my plate. I spent their whole lives showing up. Frank didn't answer. He didn't need to. Everyone in that room already understood what those empty chairs meant. When it came time for my speech, I stood behind the podium and thanked every person who had helped me throughout my career. I thanked my supervisors, my coworkers, the city, the apprentices. I even joked about finally being able to sleep past 5 in the morning. The audience laughed. Nobody realized how carefully I avoided looking at the front row. Because if I had looked directly at those two empty chairs, I wasn't sure I'd have finished the speech. After the applause faded and everyone began leaving, dozens of people stopped to shake my hand. "You earned this. Congratulations. Enjoy retirement." Every goodbye felt sincere. Then the parking lot emptied. I climbed into my pickup truck alone. When I reached home, The silence inside the house felt louder than the applause had. The retirement plaque rested on the kitchen table. Beside it sat two unopened congratulation cards, addressed from Eric and Melissa. They had mailed cards, but they couldn't spare an hour. I made myself a cup of coffee, even though it was nearly 10 at night. As I stood in the garage staring at the object hidden beneath a gray cotton cover, I slowly pulled the fabric away. There it was, my 1967 Chevrolet Corvette Stingray. Marina blue, white interior, every chrome trim piece polished until it reflected the garage lights like glass. I'd bought the neglected shell 15 years earlier from a retired mechanic who thought it would never drive again. Every overtime shift I'd worked had funded another small piece. One paycheck bought new suspension components. Another paid for the rebuilt engine. Christmas bonuses became paint. Vacation money became interior restoration. Piece by piece, year by year, I'd quietly rebuilt the car with my own hands. Not because I wanted attention, because I'd promised myself that when retirement finally arrived, I'd own something built entirely through patience. The next morning, I was wiping away the last fingerprints from the hood when Frank pulled into the driveway. He stared at the Corvette and whistled. "You've been hiding this beauty from everyone." "I wasn't hiding it. You finished it." I smiled. "Yesterday." He grinned. "Then quit sitting in this garage feeling sorry for yourself." I laughed. "Easier said than done." "No," he replied. "Today you celebrate. If your kids couldn't bother showing up, that's on them, not on you." He tossed me a flyer. The annual Saturday Classic Car Gathering. Just 20 minutes away. Bring the Corvette. "I don't know. You've spent 15 years restoring it." He folded his arms. "Drive the thing." An hour later, I pulled into the show. People gathered almost immediately. Questions came from every direction. What year? Original engine. Did you restore it yourself? Judges admired the craftsmanship. Older enthusiasts shared stories about owning similar cars decades earlier. Someone asked if they could photograph it. Then another person asked. Soon people were taking pictures with the Corvette from every angle. One organizer even insisted I stand beside it. "You restored it," he said. "You belong in the picture too." I reluctantly agreed. By evening, those photos had spread across local community pages and classic car groups online. The next afternoon, my phone rang. Melissa. Her voice sounded warmer than it had in months. "Dad." "Hi, sweetheart. We need to talk." I waited. "Family meeting." "When?" "Tomorrow." Something about her tone felt rehearsed. Not guilty. Not apologetic. Careful. I looked through the garage window toward the Corvette. Then I glanced toward the locked filing cabinet inside my study. "I'll be there," I answered quietly. "And I'll bring everything we need." That night I couldn't sleep. Not because I was angry. Because I kept replaying two completely different conversations in my head. The first was my supervisor thanking me for 43 years of service. The second was Melissa saying, "Family meeting tomorrow." The contrast bothered me. One group had appreciated everything I'd done. The other had barely noticed I retired until after pictures of a Corvette started circulating online. I wandered into my den and opened an old cedar chest that had followed me through 3 houses. Inside were dozens of photo albums. I hadn't looked through them in years. I sat down and opened the oldest one. There was Eric at 6 years old, sitting on my shoulders at the county fair. Melissa at 8, holding the blue bicycle I'd worked overtime to buy her for Christmas. Camping trips, graduations, school concerts, soccer games. Every picture seemed to have one thing in common. I was behind the camera, or standing somewhere nearby. Always present, always available. I smiled at one picture of Melissa wearing braces. She'd been terrified before her first middle school dance. "I look ridiculous," she'd cried. I'd driven across town after work to buy her the silver necklace she'd admired in a department store window. She wore it to every formal event for years. Another page showed Eric's college graduation. The tuition hadn't been easy. I'd emptied most of my emergency savings after his sophomore year when his scholarships fell through. "You don't have to do this, Dad," he'd said. "I know." I'd signed the check anyway. "You finish school, I'll figure the rest out." And I had. I always figured it out. The next album held photographs from Melissa's divorce. She'd called me sobbing at 2 in the morning. "I can't stay here anymore." Within 30 minutes, I was loading boxes into my pickup truck. For 6 months, she and the kids lived in my guest rooms. I never charged her $1. Never asked when she planned to leave. I simply wanted my daughter safe. Then came the babysitting years. Weekend after weekend. Canceled fishing trips. Postponed vacations. Skipped reunions. Whenever Eric or Melissa needed help, my calendar somehow became flexible. Whenever I hoped for a family dinner, everyone suddenly became busy. I leaned back and rubbed my eyes. It hadn't happened overnight. The distance had grown, one small disappointment at a time. Forgotten Father's Days. Rescheduled birthdays. Last-minute cancellations. Quick phone calls that always ended with, "Sorry, Dad, something came up." I'd convinced myself adulthood was simply complicated. Maybe it was. But the retirement celebration had stripped away every excuse I'd built for them. People make time for what matters. That sentence refused to leave my mind. The following morning, I stepped outside to collect my newspaper. My neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, was trimming roses along the fence. She smiled when she saw me. "Retired man. I guess that's official now." She laughed. "So, how was the celebration?" "It was nice." She tilted her head. "I heard there were a lot of people." "There were." "And your children?" The question landed harder than I expected. "They couldn't make it." She stopped clipping the roses. "Oh." That single word carried more sympathy than any speech could have. "I'm sure they had their reasons," I said automatically. Mrs. Alvarez looked at me for several seconds before speaking. "Harold." "What?" "You've defended them every single time anyone has ever asked." I didn't answer. She smiled sadly. "You've always been a good father." Then she quietly returned to her gardening. No lecture. No criticism. Just the truth. Back inside the house, I found myself staring at the retirement plaque again. 43 years. Not one complaint. Yet I couldn't stop thinking about 2 empty chairs. Around 6 that evening my phone rang. "Eric." I answered immediately. "Hey, son." "Hey, Dad." For a brief second I waited for it. "I'm sorry I missed your retirement." It never came. Instead he asked, "So, I saw those pictures." "The car." "Yeah." There was excitement in his voice I'd never heard when he talked about me. "Looks incredible." "Thanks. I didn't know you'd finished restoring it." "I finished it the day after retirement. People online are saying it's worth a fortune." I chuckled softly. People online say a lot of things. No, seriously. His tone sharpened. What do you think it's worth? I paused. I've never had it professionally appraised. But roughly, I don't know. I read it could be worth around $145,000. I remained silent. Then came another question. You planning on keeping it? I just retired yesterday. I know, I just mean long term. We'll see. You ever think about letting one of the grandkids have it eventually? There it was. Not once during the entire conversation had he asked, how was your retirement? Did you enjoy the party? Are you okay? Nothing. Only the Corvette. Only its value. Only where it might end up someday. I answered carefully. I haven't made any decisions. Oh. He sounded disappointed. Well, I guess we'll talk tomorrow. I'm sure we will. The call ended. I stared at the silent phone for a long moment before setting it on the kitchen counter. Then I walked into my study, unlocked the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, pulled out a thick blue folder. Across the front in neat black lettering were 2 words. Estate planning. I placed the folder beside my car keys. Tomorrow's meeting wasn't going to be about a classic Corvette. I had a feeling it was going to be about something much more revealing. And for the first time in years, I intended to arrive prepared. Why would Harold bring estate documents to what was supposed to be a simple family meeting? Melissa's driveway was already full when I pulled in. That wasn't what I'd expected. I turned off the engine and looked at the row of familiar vehicles. My sister Diane, my cousin Raymond, Melissa's in-laws, even my older brother Walter. I frowned. So much for a private family meeting. I picked up the blue estate planning folder from the passenger seat, locked the truck, and walked toward the front door. Before I could knock, Melissa opened it. Dad, you're here. She leaned in for a quick hug. It lasted barely a second. Come in. I stepped inside. The living room fell quiet for just a moment. Then everyone smiled. Harold, retirement looks good on you. Congratulations. The greeting sounded friendly enough. But something felt rehearsed. Almost every pair of eyes drifted toward the folder tucked beneath my arm. Walter slapped me on the shoulder. I hear you've been keeping secrets. I raised an eyebrow. What secrets? He laughed. That Corvette. A few people chuckled. There it is, I thought. I was wondering how long it'd take. Melissa led me toward the dining room. Coffee had been poured. Desserts were arranged on trays. It looked less like an apology and more like a committee meeting. Eric walked over with an unusually wide smile. Hey, Dad. He shook my hand instead of hugging me. I've been looking at those Corvette pictures all morning. I'm sure you have. It really is beautiful. Thank you. You restored every part yourself. Almost. I can't believe you never told us. I looked at him calmly. You never asked. His smile faded. Only slightly. Everyone settled around the large dining table. Someone pushed out the chair at the head. For Dad. I sat down. The conversations immediately centered around one subject. Not retirement. Not my health. Not what I plan to do with all my free time. The Corvette. Raymond whistled. I heard it's worth at least $145,000. Walter laughed. Maybe more in today's market. Melissa smiled. I had no idea Dad was sitting on something like that. Eric nodded. You've always been careful with money. I listened. Nobody asked how I felt after retiring. Nobody mentioned the celebration they hadn't attended. The car had become the guest of honor. Not me. Then Diane laughed. You've been hiding money from all of us. A few people smiled. I didn't. I wasn't hiding anything. It was a joke, she said. Maybe. But jokes usually reveal what people are already thinking. Melissa leaned forward. Dad. Yes. We've actually been talking. I gathered that. You've worked hard your whole life. I have. And retirement should be simple. I agree. She smiled. Which is why maybe it doesn't make sense to keep such an expensive collector's car. I folded my hands together. What do you mean? It's valuable. I know. It costs money to insure. Yes. To maintain. Correct. She looked toward Eric. He immediately picked up the conversation. What Melissa's saying is, maybe it belongs in the family. The family. You know. He shrugged casually. One of the grandkids someday. Walter nodded. That'd be nice. Raymond chimed in. Passing something like that down creates a legacy. I noticed how naturally everyone discussed my possessions, as though ownership had already begun changing hands. No one asked what I wanted. Melissa continued. You've already done enough work. I suppose. So maybe this is the right time to simplify. Simplify. Sell the car. She smiled warmly. Or transfer it before something unexpected happens. Unexpected. Interesting choice of words. I leaned back in my chair. So this meeting, Melissa hesitated, is about planning. For my retirement. She nodded. And protecting your assets. There it was. Not concern. Management. Eric added, Dad, we're just thinking ahead. Really? Of course. So where was all this planning 3 nights ago? The room became noticeably quieter. Melissa blinked. What do you mean? My retirement celebration. Nobody answered. Walter looked down into his coffee. Raymond suddenly found the tablecloth fascinating. Eric cleared his throat. We already explained why we missed it. I remember. Melissa forced a smile. This isn't about that. No. No. Before I could respond, Melissa's teenage son walked into the dining room carrying his phone. Grandpa, your car's famous. Everyone looked toward him. He held up the screen. A local community page. The photograph from the car gathering. Me standing beside the Corvette. Thousands of reactions. Hundreds of comments. One headline read, Local retiree completes 15-year restoration of rare 1967 Corvette. Raymond laughed. That's where everyone saw it. So that's how the news spread, Walter said. Melissa looked genuinely surprised. I didn't know the pictures had gotten that much attention. Before anyone else could speak, my cousin Linda quietly said something that changed the entire mood. I thought that's why we were all invited. Melissa slowly turned toward her. What? Linda looked confused. You told me everyone should come because Harold's Corvette was worth a fortune now, and the family needed to talk before he made any big decisions. The silence hit the room like a power outage. Melissa's face drained of color. Eric stared at the table. Several relatives exchanged uncomfortable looks. Nobody had intended for that sentence to be said out loud. I looked around the room. Every face. Every expression. Then I asked the only question that mattered. If that Corvette had never existed, I paused. Would every one of you be sitting at this table today? Nobody spoke. Not Eric. Not Melissa. Not anyone. The silence answered better than words ever could. Without raising my voice, without accusing anyone, I slowly lifted the thick blue folder I'd brought with me. Then I placed it squarely in the center of the dining room table. The sound echoed through the silent house. Every eye locked onto it. No one reached for the folder. Not at first. It sat in the middle of the dining room table like it belonged there, its blue cover suddenly more interesting than the coffee, the desserts, or even the Corvette that had brought everyone together. Eric finally broke the silence. So, what's in it? I rested both hands on the table. We'll get to that. Melissa forced a nervous laugh. Dad, nobody's trying to pressure you. Aren't they? She hesitated. We're just having a conversation. I've noticed. I looked around the table. Before we talk about what's inside this folder, I'd like to talk about something else. Walter shifted uncomfortably. Harold, it won't take long. Nobody interrupted me. For the first time since I'd arrived, everyone was listening. I retired 3 days ago. I looked directly at Eric. When did I tell you the celebration was? He swallowed. Thursday. And when did you cancel? The afternoon of the party. I nodded. Then I turned toward Melissa. And you? The same day. You said Tyler's schedule suddenly changed. She looked down. Yes. I understand. I opened a smaller envelope I tucked inside the folder. I'm getting older. I know memories fade. So I started keeping records. Eric frowned. What records? Without answering, I removed several neatly organized sheets of paper. Each one had dates, times, brief notes. I slid the first page across the table. What is this? Walter asked. A family calendar. Melissa looked confused. I don't understand. It's every invitation I've sent over the last 5 years. Silence returned. I continued calmly. Sunday dinners. I pointed to one line. Melissa declined, soccer tournament. Another line. Eric canceled 1 hour before dinner, work emergency. Another. Father's Day barbecue postponed, nobody available. I turned another page. Christmas breakfast. Easter lunch. My 64th birthday. My 65th birthday. Every event had a note beside it. Accepted. Cancelled. No response. Rescheduled. Ignored. I wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. I simply kept turning the pages. The dates spoke for themselves. Melissa stared at the stack. You kept all this. I wasn't keeping score. Then why? Because after a while, I started wondering whether I was imagining things. Nobody said a word. So I wrote everything down. I looked toward Eric. Turns out I wasn't imagining anything. He rubbed the back of his neck. Dad. No. I raised one hand. My turn. He leaned back without another word. I pulled out my phone. I'd like to show everyone something else. I opened my text messages. Not the recent ones. The old ones. Months. Years. I placed the phone on the table where everyone could see. Dinner next Sunday. I'd love to see everyone. No reply. Another. Happy birthday, Eric. Proud of you. Let me know if you're free this weekend. 3 days later. Sorry, Dad, busy. Another. Melissa, I made Tyler's favorite cookies if you'd like to stop by. Scene. No response. Another. Retirement celebration next Thursday. It would mean a lot if you could come. I slowly looked around the room. Those two empty chairs weren't an accident. Melissa covered her mouth. Eric stared at the tabletop. I continued. I didn't become lonely because you missed one party. I let that sentence settle. I became lonely because that party finally made me stop explaining away years of choices. Nobody moved. Nobody reached for their coffee. Even the grandchildren, who had been laughing in the next room earlier, had gone quiet. Walter sighed heavily. I didn't know it was this bad. No, I answered softly. Most people didn't. Melissa finally spoke. Dad, we're raising kids. I know. We're busy. I know. Life gets complicated. It does. She looked relieved for a second. Then I finished my thought. But somehow life became less complicated the moment everyone saw a $145,000 Corvette. The room froze again. Raymond quietly looked toward the window. Linda folded her arms. Nobody defended that timing. Because nobody could. Eric suddenly leaned forward. Dad, that's not fair. I met his eyes. No. No. We've always cared. I nodded slowly. I'd like to believe that. You should. Then tell me something. He waited. What was the first question you asked me yesterday? He frowned. I don't remember. I do. I repeated it word for word. How much do you think the Corvette is worth? Eric said nothing. The second question. Still silence. Are you planning on keeping it? He looked away. The third. I didn't wait for him. Maybe one of the grandkids should get it someday. I folded my hands again. You know what question never came? Nobody answered. Dad, how was your retirement? The words hung in the air. Melissa wiped tears from her eyes. I didn't realize. No, I said gently. You didn't. She whispered, I'm sorry. I believed she meant it. But apologies arrive differently when they're late. Eric shifted in his chair. Dad, we were only trying to look out for you. I smiled sadly. I've heard that sentence before. When? Every time someone wants to make my decisions for me. Walter quietly nodded. Linda looked directly at Eric. I think your father has a point. So do I, Raymond admitted. Melissa looked around the table in disbelief. You all think we're greedy. Nobody answered immediately. That silence was answer enough. I took a slow breath. The Corvette didn't change this family. Every eye returned to me. It simply exposed something that had been sitting here for years. I rested my hand on the blue folder. Conditional attention. No one argued. Because there wasn't an argument left to make. Eric finally looked at the folder again. His voice was barely above a whisper. So, he cleared his throat. What's actually in those papers? I looked at him for a long moment. Then I opened the folder. You're about to find out. The room was so quiet that I could hear the grandfather clock in Melissa's hallway ticking. Nobody spoke. Nobody reached for a cup of coffee. Every pair of eyes followed my hands as I opened the blue folder. I removed a neatly organized stack of documents and placed them on the table. At the top sat a letter from my attorney. Beneath it were signed estate planning documents. Every page carried official seals and notarized signatures. Melissa leaned forward. Dad. I looked up. I met with my attorney 4 months ago. Eric frowned. 4 months? Before I retired. Before the Corvette pictures. Long before anyone outside my garage knew the restoration was finished. The room became even quieter. Walter adjusted his glasses and looked at the date on the first page. He's telling the truth. I nodded. I didn't rewrite my estate plan because of this meeting. I looked at Eric. And I didn't rewrite it because of the Corvette. Melissa blinked. Then why? I folded my hands. Because I finally accepted something I'd spent years refusing to admit. Nobody interrupted. I was chasing a relationship that only existed when someone needed something. Melissa lowered her eyes. Eric stared at the documents without speaking. I continued calmly. I kept telling myself everyone was busy. I said adulthood was complicated. I convinced myself next month would be different. I looked around the table. But sitting in that banquet hall, watching 2 empty chairs through an entire retirement celebration, I shook my head. That finally made me stop lying to myself. No one argued. They couldn't, because they all knew exactly which 2 chairs I meant. I slid one document toward Walter. Go ahead. He adjusted his glasses and began reading aloud. The 1967 Chevrolet Corvette shall remain the sole property of Harold Bennett for the duration of his lifetime. Eric's shoulders dropped. Melissa listened without moving. Walter continued. Upon Mr. Bennett's passing, the vehicle shall be sold through a licensed collector auction. Raymond looked surprised. So nobody inherits the car? I answered. No. Melissa looked up. What happens to the money? I smiled for the first time that afternoon. It funds scholarships. Everyone looked at me. I continued. For students entering skilled trades. I pointed toward the documents. Electrical apprentices. Lineworkers. Industrial maintenance. The young people who remind me why I loved my career. Frankly, I'd rather help someone build a future than let a car tear apart what's left of my family. Walter slowly nodded. That's actually a wonderful idea. Linda smiled. So your career keeps helping people. Exactly. Eric rubbed his forehead. So the Corvette was never meant for anyone. It was meant to fulfill a promise. He frowned. What promise? The one I made myself 15 years ago. I glanced toward the window where my truck was parked. When I bought that rusted shell, I promised myself I'd finish it before retirement. I never promised it to anyone else. Melissa swallowed. And the rest of your estate. I slid another document across the table. My attorney and I created family trusts. Eric immediately looked up. So we are included. Yes. Relief crossed his face for a split second. Then I finished my sentence. They're structured. He frowned. What does that mean? It means nobody receives anything simply because they're entitled. Melissa looked confused. I explained patiently. The trusts are designed to prevent arguments. They're managed independently. No one controls another person's share. No one can pressure anyone else. And no one can convince me to rewrite them every few years. Walter smiled. Smart. Raymond nodded. Very smart. Melissa slowly shook her head. You really thought we'd fight over your money? I met her eyes. I hoped you wouldn't. Then I looked around the room. But this meeting answered that question. No one denied it. Melissa suddenly covered her face. I'm sorry. Her voice cracked. I really am. Tears slipped through her fingers. I should have been at your retirement. You should have. I don't even have a good excuse. I know. She looked at me. I saw those pictures online. I know. And I thought. She couldn't finish. I gently did it for her. You thought maybe I'd been hiding money. She nodded through tears. I hated that thought the moment I got here. I believed her. Not because the words erased what had happened. Because regret has a different sound than defensiveness. Eric wasn't crying. He looked exhausted. Dad. Yes. I honestly didn't realize how many times we'd canceled. I pointed toward the calendar pages. That's why I wrote them down. So I'd stop wondering whether it was all in my head. He stared at the pages for a long moment. I've been a terrible son. I didn't answer immediately. Finally, I said quietly, You've been an absent one. That landed harder than anger ever could. Nobody defended him. Not even Melissa. Linda finally broke the silence. I remember Harold driving 2 hours to my husband's surgery. Walter nodded. He never missed Mom's appointments. Raymond added. When my basement flooded, Harold spent his entire weekend helping me. One after another, relatives began remembering moments when I'd quietly shown up for them. Not because I expected anything. Because that's who I'd always been. Then Walter looked directly at Eric and Melissa. Your father has spent decades making everyone else's life easier. He gestured toward the retirement plaque sitting in the folder. And neither of you could give him one evening. Neither of my children answered. They couldn't. Because every person in that room knew it was true. After another long silence, I carefully gathered the papers back into the folder. I didn't come here to punish either of you. Melissa looked up. I came because I wanted you to understand something. What? Love that appears after someone becomes valuable isn't love you can build retirement on. Nobody spoke. I've spent too many years waiting beside the phone. I won't spend the rest of my life doing that. I stood. So what happens now? Eric asked quietly. I smiled. That depends on you. He frowned. What do you mean? If you want a relationship with me. I rested my hand on the folder. It starts with showing up. Not for paperwork. Not for money. Not for cars. Just showing up. Melissa wiped away another tear. We can fix this. I answered honestly. I don't know. That truth hurt everyone in the room. Including me. But I do know this. I'm done chasing people. If you want to see me, you know where I live. I picked up the folder. No one tried to stop me. No one argued. As I reached the front door, Walter called after me. Harold. I turned. I'm proud of you. I smiled. Thank you. Outside, the afternoon sun reflected off the Corvette's polished marina blue paint. I opened the driver's door, settled into the seat I'd rebuilt with my own hands, and started the engine. The familiar rumble filled the quiet neighborhood. A week later, I took that Corvette on its longest drive yet. Not alone. Frank was there. 3 retired electricians. 2 young apprentices I'd mentored. And half a dozen friends from the Classic Car Club who had celebrated my retirement when the people I loved hadn't. We spent the afternoon driving winding country roads, laughing over coffee stops, and arguing about carburetors and paint colors. Not one person asked about my estate. Not one person mentioned inheritance. They simply enjoyed the ride. Retirement taught me something I should have learned years earlier. Being needed isn't the same as being valued. For 43 years, I showed up because it was the right thing to do. Now, for the first time in my life, I had learned something even more important. The people who deserve a place in your life are the ones who show up when there's nothing to gain. They ignored the man who spent a lifetime showing up for them. But the moment I finally started showing up for myself, everything changed.